Hi, it's Cayman Reynolds, and welcome to tonight's show. So, we usually don't start like that, but we have a special guest tonight and some special information for you. I would just want to say a couple of things before we get started. This isn't going to be your typical live chat where I'm just fielding random questions. We are going to be doing that tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Central Time. So, if you'd like to join us tomorrow at 7 p.m., we will just take your general bee questions. But right now, I want to focus on a company that is doing some really interesting bee work. And there's been several things that I've seen. What actually inspired me to do this interview, if you will, is a couple of people posted on the internet some very odd and crazy things that just simply weren't true. And YouTube is a powerful tool. It's kind of more like a sword, and it cuts both ways. With tonight's video, I hope that we're able to enlighten many beekeepers on what is going on with Dalan and why they maybe should know about it. I also want to take one step back and say, as a beekeeper of 23 years and having spent most of my teens and all of my adult life around bees, my goal is to see the bee industry not only sustain itself, but to grow and be healthy. We have a lot of challenges, and we have in the past as well. Those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it, are the words that come to my mind. And we've had varroa, tracheal mites, we've had virus strains, we've had so many different things that have affected beekeepers and honeybees. And with the North American Honeybee Expo, with this YouTube channel, and anything that Laurel and I do, we hope to be able to help beekeepers learn how to be able to brace for challenges, prepare for them, and to weather them extremely good into the future. Obviously, tropolapse is a big one, and there's so much that we don't know about them. When Varroa came, it reshaped our industry. We weren't prepared. That is why I'm working with many companies, not or I'm just like part of the company. I'm totally not. I'm just doing this because I, just like you guys, want to know what's going on. I want to be involved in hoping that maybe some new things are going to come out and help us as beekeepers and help our bees. And to do that, we have to chart into new frontiers. We have to try new things. Maybe even be a little too optimistic. And I prefer to be that way. Too much negativity in the world. So I'm super excited to talk with Dalan tonight. They are amongst several companies that are investing into the beekeeping community. And I am very grateful that they have chosen to do so. We definitely have a lot of growing to do and a lot of new things to learn about our bees and the pests that plague them. Without further ado, Everett and Amy, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see how well this goes, and then I'll give you feedback. All of that to say, I appreciate what you guys are doing. Like I said before, there's so much work that needs to be done in the bee industry, so much work, and the fact that you guys are choosing to spend energy and time into the bee industry is important to me and several other people. So, everyone, we are going to let Amy and Everett take over for a little bit and talk about what Dalan is doing, what they're pushing towards. And hey, yeah, there's a link down there. There's some controversy here, so you don't want to miss it. Stick around, and if you have any questions, maybe we'll take them towards the end. All right, Amy, Everett, I'm out of here, and good luck.
Thanks, Cayman.
Very good. And Cayman will interrupt anytime he wants to. You know how this is going to go. So we look forward to it. My name's Everett Hendrickson. We have the great Amy Floyd here with us today as well. Some of you may have seen us at the Bee Expo there at our presentation. Just very briefly, my experiences in agriculture, mostly crop production in the fruit veg market. Started my journey in with tomatoes in the southeast in Florida, branched out to blueberries and strawberries and other different various crops and protection as well as production. That introduced me to bees with a biological fungicide that came onto the market out of Canada at one point and teed me up to work with Dalan. And so how did we get here and what do we do? And then we'll introduce Amy. But just briefly, who is Dalan and why does it matter? And where did this all come from? Was this, hey, look, the pandemic made vaccines famous. Let's try to jump on board that. That was not what happened. This research had begun years and years prior. It came out of a lab with Daniel Freitag and Francie Dickel. They were looking into invertebrate health because at that time we really had very little knowledge as to what the individual immune system in an invertebrate was consisted of. So that's what they were researching over in Helsinki. They came across one of 6 different pathways that we know is in the immune system of a honeybee or an invertebrate, and that's called transgenerational immune priming. We'll talk just a little bit about that later. But once they discovered that pathway, they looked at different things that could excite the immune system that way. Another researcher came along, Annette Kleiser, excuse me, and that's our CEO. So when I mispronounce her name, it may pay later, but we'll see how it runs. She gets into the picture and she says, look, if we're going to do this for the market, we need to really look at what invertebrate matters most to food supply chain. And that's obviously pollinators and the honeybee. So Dalan was founded by these 3 researchers, not any acute business folks at the time. Annette's come a long way. And she, again, will let me know how that plays later. But these were researchers from a laboratory setting. The principle is healthy animals and healthy planet. That's what they founded Dalan on over 8 years ago. We're advocates for pollinators first. That's obviously primarily the honeybee and the people who take care of them, you folks, the beekeepers. We know that a healthy industry is needed so that we can secure a strong food supply chain and have food security as a country and as a continent. The amount of imported food that we have, especially in fruit and veg, is immense. And when we see things like the pandemic happen, for better or worse, ports get shut down, all of a sudden we worry about what's going to be in the store shelves. And when we have collapses like we've seen this past year, it's yet to be seen how that pollination cycle is going to affect our industry and food production this year. It may be bad. It may be fine. We'll have to wait and see. But nonetheless, it is a concern. And so that's what Dalan does. And that's why we're here. We have the world's first registered and proven preventative. It did come out for American foul brood, and many in the States say, well, American foul brood is not a big issue anymore. Why are we doing that? Globally, AFB is a big deal. And it takes out a lot of colonies all over the world. It was also a track that was already being proven in the lab. So that's why AFB was the first release. In using it in the field and the trials that we've seen come back over the last 3 years or more, we see that it's resulted in strong evidence that a lot more than AFB protection is happening. There is a trigger into the immune system of the queen that is providing her brood with an innate immune response. Leads to things like 85 to 90% suppression in deformed wing virus. We have some evidence that points to that. And not just one field study. It's been replicated this year. So we know that that's a direct relation to what's going on with transgenerational immune priming. And all of this is from a product that has no chemicals in it. There's no genetic modification, no mRNA. This is not that type of technology. It's very simple. It's very basic. I'm going to let Amy go into that. But it is a preventative IPM management tool. And it's the world's first USDA and CFIA registered vaccine for honeybees. However, like I said, this isn't the vaccine we've come to hear about as of late. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy. She's going to give you just a brief introduction as to her background because it's quite impressive. And then she's going to tell us what's in it. So Amy, tell us a little bit about you and Phoenix.
Thanks, Evan. Yeah, so my background comes from honeybee research, really. I worked with the USDA working on honeybee nutrition and pathogens and toxicity for about 6 years and got my master's degree working with European foul brood. in honeybees. And then while I worked for the USDA, I started kind of doing some blinded trials for Dalan. And as it came to market, I joined their mission on getting this into beekeepers' hands. I really love the idea of science getting to actually play a role in helping people. So it was a unique opportunity. And I actually just hit my three-year mark. So I've been with Dalan for 3 whole years now. And it's been amazing to watch it grow from 6 employees to, I think we're at around 25 or so now. So we are still kind of in our startup phase, but I think that, as Everett kind of alluded to, that gives us some more credibility that we're really here to help beekeepers. We're not a big company just trying to find another thing to get you to spend money on. We're really trying to help. So, and it's been quite the journey to get here. And I am a beekeeper myself. I have my own small honey production business in Arizona. And I joke that I'm the smallest migratory beekeeper because I move my bees from Tucson up to Flagstaff and back and forth, depending on the season. So I know how it goes, just on a slightly smaller scale. And I've spent a lot of time with the guys in California, those queen producers, and kind of have had my toes in lots of different parts of this industry. So I guess I'll answer Everett's question now about what is in the vaccine. So our vaccine is technically called a bacterin, which is a fancy word for dead bacteria. So all that is in our vaccine is inactivated bacteria in an aqueous solution so that it's easy to administer. So there's nothing crazy about it. We have to grow a specific strain of American foulbrood to create it, but that is all it is dead Painobacillus larva. And that's it. It's very simple. It's very unique. Well, it's not unique in the world of vaccines. This kind of technology has been used before, just to expose someone to something dead so its body can recognize it. But insects don't quite work the way that mammals do, in that they create antibodies. Their immune system recognizes one type of something and then responds to that.
Right. So we know what's in it now. It's just dead bacteria in an aqueous solution, no chemicals or anything else that would affect anything. Just briefly, what is TGIP and how does it go through? Because this is going to be administered through Queen Candy. We'll hear about that a little bit later. But what is TGIP and what's the pathway?
Yeah, so transgenerational immune priming is a very fancy way to say going from one generation to another. We're transferring information. So that's transgenerational, queen to offspring. And then immune priming is we're just priming their immune system. We're saying, hey, get ready to recognize this thing is bad. So that pathway in honeybees works by worker bees who are exposed to the environment, who are exposed to the hive. If they come in contact with a pathogen or something potentially toxic, they end up feeding it to the queen via royal jelly. And then that queen is set up to pass that information on into the egg yolks of her larva. So that's how they sort of move information between generations in order to kind of keep everyone up to speed on what they need to be doing to protect themselves. And at some level, that's their immune systems. Their immune systems need to be kicked in to fight certain things. But that is a natural pathway. That is something honeybees do on their own. Us exposing them to our bacterin is just kind of forcing that pathway along. So it just encourages them to do that ahead of time instead of them having to naturally run into some of these pathogens.
Gotcha. So that's the natural pathway that's in the bee. So we're not doing anything out of the ordinary with nature. Would this be the same as if I had just a huge infection of AFB in the comb that would get fed to the bee? Is there much difference in it as far as the pathway itself goes?
The pathway itself would be similar. The difference in vaccinating instead of letting your bees naturally be exposed is that for them to pass that information along in a meaningful way, the number of spores in the hive would have to be so high that your hive's not going to live through it anyway. And so this is sort of just a preemptive way to do it. But otherwise, that is the natural pathway. That's how they pass along information all the time.
Gotcha. So now how do we administer the vaccine? We've talked enough about it, I think, and we'll probably answer some questions at the end if we have enough time. But what is the process? If I'm a beekeeper, I have, I don't know, 300 hives and I want to get a few vials, how do I do this?
Yeah, so the vaccine is very easily mixed into queen candy. So the fondant-like sugar we use for sugar plugs, the candy that queens are shipped with, that candy, we measure out, say we're vaccinating 50 queens, we would want to weigh out 300 grams of queen candy, and then we mix one whole vial into that queen candy, and then you knead it like you're making dough for 5 to 10 minutes. And then that candy gets fed to attendant bees, worker bees. They consume that, and then they feed it to queens through the royal jelly. We did a cool, I'm going to get a little sciencey for half a second. We did a cool study where we fluorescently marked the bacteria in the vaccine, and then we tracked it through the workers and through the queen. And so we dissected out all the parts of the worker to make sure it was going where we needed it to go. So it goes through her midgut into the fat bodies, into the hypopharyngeal glands of the workers, and then we see it go through the queen's midgut into her fat bodies and then into her ovaries. So it's very cool to see that pathway. Bacteria is hard to see. So it's kind of cool that we've confirmed that pathway. But so it goes through that, and then that information is in the egg yolk. It all happens via a protein called vitellogenin, which is a egg yolk protein, but it's also found in high abundance in hypopharyngeal glands and throughout the queen. So it makes sense that that's what's moving that information along. So after that vaccination period happens over 7 days, we need exposure time. The queen needs time to build that up in her system so that she can keep passing it along throughout her life. And then those queens are ready to go into hive.
Gotcha. So the workers pass it on to the queen. The nurse bees pass it on to the queen. The queen then, once the trigger is in her ovaries, she's passing on a protection to her brood. That's how we understand it, right?
Yeah. Priming their immune system.
Any chance this is going to make it into the honey?
No. So this product is safe to use during honey flows. It's safe throughout the entire season. It's also safe to use if you take your bees to organic agriculture or anything like that. But the vaccine itself is a natural product. There's no chemicals or residues in it. It's really just dead bacteria in a aqueous solution. So even if it were to be in the hive, it wouldn't be leaving behind any residues. But the vaccination process happens outside of the hive anyway. So it doesn't really have any effect like other treatments do.
So I need to come back to how this is working in the process. So I get a queen. She's mated. Now it does work with virgins. We understand that as well. But if they're not a viable queen, do we really want to spend the time and money to inoculate her? So if I get a queen, I get her in a cage, I put some attendants in there, and I put maybe a candy plug in, right? That's how the label works. Has there been any exploration into other operations that, custom protocol? Is there an easier way to do this?
Yeah. So where we have a little bit of a loophole in our protocols where we can design a custom protocol for beekeepers who the on-label approach might not be ideal. And so in that scenario, we use a normal shipping box and put that 300 grams of vaccinated candy in the bottom of the shipping box, and then add a water source near a screened side of that shipping box, and then add 50 queens, add attendants on top on the outside, very similar to as when you are shipping queens or when you receive queens. And then that box goes into a dark 75-ish degree room or space, and they consume that candy and over that 7-day period. So that's sort of a custom protocol we've made for certain beekeepers who have asked for it. Just because doing cage by cage can be tedious when you're doing it at scale. And if you are receiving queens, if you aren't a queen producer yourself, if you order 100 queens in the mail and you get those queens, it's very easy to just swap out the candy that's in there with a vaccinated candy patty and put them in their dark 75-ish degree space for 7 days. So
yeah. Why can't I use this in my mating nukes?
So we don't, the mating or the shipping box and the cage protocols we're isolating them to a certain food source. And all those workers are going to consume is vaccinated candy for that 7 days. And we know that that's what the queens are getting fed. So we can guarantee that those queens are vaccinated at the end of 7 days. In a mating nuke scenario or a queen bank or anywhere where they have access to other food or the environment, we can't guarantee. We don't know that the workers who are feeding the queen were consuming the vaccinated candy. And so we can't, it's possible, it's probable, but we don't know for sure. And so I like the more isolated environment for vaccinating.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
No, I was laughing at you.
You're just laughing at me?
Yeah, just laughing at you.
Question. It's really walking and chewing gum. The older I get, it's really tough to do. And so
I'm still stuck on Cayman's chicken in a tuxedo comment. So
yeah, no. Will it protect future generations? That's the question I get a lot.
Yeah, that would be really cool if this was just like future. A queen could make a bunch of vaccinated queens. But because we're not genetically modifying anything and the queens themselves are not genetically modified, each individual queen needs to be vaccinated. We're just exposing her to the bacteria. And so there's nothing genetically modified. Her drones can't pass this on when they mate with other queens. It is just this queen, her offspring are protected while they're developing larvae, and that's where it ends.
Gotcha. So an interesting thing came up over the week, and I just think I'll bring it up right now. We were when I say we, the team, I was not there because they wanted the meeting to be successful. So the team was out in California, the beekeeper relations team, working with a rather large queen breeder out there, queen producer. And the comments that we got back are typical, and that's why I bring it up, in that we've explained how to do this. And obviously, for each client that wants to try the vaccine, we have one-on-one help, right? What is the general reaction the first time people do this?
Usually the first time I am on site and walk people through the vaccination process, the lead up is always like, how long is this going to take? Do we need to reserve a whole day? And I'm usually like, I can be there for like an hour and a half just for chatting. The actual training itself usually takes less than half an hour. And their reaction is always, oh my gosh, this is so much easier than I thought it was going to be. And there's a lot of relief. And I think it's a new product. It's a new technology. It's something that we're really not familiar with. And a lot of things in the beekeeping world are applied to the hive. They are not applied to the queen. And so I get why there's some like a little nervousness around learning it, but really, truly, every time I've trained someone, they're, oh, this is so easy. So
yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, it's human nature because, my family's getting ready to leave. My kids are on spring break. I've got too much to do here, and they're going to head away to see some other family. And I'm already thinking about what did I used to cook that I can cook because I don't want to try anything new. I'm not gonna be Julia Childs here, right? That's just human nature. And so we get that. We do understand that it's an easy process, but we understand that it's arduous the first time to even think about it. So That's common. Another big question I always get, and if I already asked this, I apologize. Will this protect future generations?
You did just ask this question.
Okay, then I'll leave that alone. I'm so sorry. It's just one of those days. It's pretty late here, Cayman, where I'm
Yeah,
at.
sorry. Everett was the best we could get. We tried. We really tried. Everett and I have been at several things over the years together. We pick on each other. Mostly me picking on him. He's too nice, so he's just the punching bag, and I'm the mouth, I guess. So, I got a question. I'm going to interject here. So, the American foul brood, of course, could make a comeback in the future. That's one thing that we don't know, here in the United States. I think part of the reason we're seeing less of it than, because used to was a huge problem, is because we have so many dead outs now due to Varroa and other problems like that. People argue that bees are weaker now than they've ever been. I disagree. To be able to survive the onslaught that they have to deal with, the pressures they constantly have to deal with, I think we have some pretty darn tough bees to be able to do everything that they do and also still be able to pollinate. The American foul brood, though, I mean, it could change in the future. And so there's a lot of questions in the comments. This is American foul brood bacteria. It's dead. And, years ago, I've got books on my shelf that talk about eating, humans can eat honey that has American foul brood spores in it.
Oh, yeah.
And it just, our guts are totally different than bees. But my question is, and I'm probably skipping ahead, but it's my show, so whatever. And I've heard that this could also be helpful, possibly with maybe combating viruses, and you guys are looking into that. And of course, American foul brood is great, but viruses are something that we don't have anything for right now. And so you guys are looking into that. And are you able to talk much about that?
Yeah, we can a little bit, and I'll let Amy chime in as soon as she wants to. But because we have a conditional license, we are mandated to look for bad effects, like the negative side. What unintended consequences are going on, right? And that's been going on for about 4 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, Amy. You've been working with this for 5 years from the USDA to now, roughly. So, however, when we look for bad things, which we haven't yet found, but that doesn't mean we won't find something in the future. We're still looking, and we don't want to harm. Nature is going to have a way, and we understand that. We want to enhance this natural process, not modify anything. What we are finding, though, are more positive effects in the viral world using this same vaccine. And so the field study that came back, which was kind of happenstance, we were looking for a certain pathogen. It came back and said, look, the pathogen didn't exist in the entire apiary, but by the way, we found an immense amount of deformed wing virus suppression. And we went, what? How's that? Okay. Because up to that point, we didn't think viral was an option at this moment with this technology until it advanced some more. And so we went back this year and we've replicated it, I think, 4 out of 5 times. And so looking at the different fields and the different different areas of the country. So from the South to the West to Canada. And you mentioned Canada and AFB. Right. We are seeing, especially in Canada, Saskatchewan measures this intense, and they can take honey off the shelf and it has AFB spores in it. And they can test what the level is because, look, AFB spores exist in hives at least 60% of the time. We know that. The data tells us that, or at least 53%, excuse me, whether it's in Pennsylvania or Connecticut or Saskatchewan. So you can take honey and you can find AFB spores. We are seeing, especially in Canada, they've been measuring the antibiotic resistant strains of AFB, because that really terrifies them. And where you see antibiotic use drop, you see AFB go up again. And because it lives, look, dormant spores live in trees and everything for maybe 100 years. We know it, it's in the 50s and 60s at a minimum. So AFB will always be around. Viruses will always be around. It's a matter of controlling it and being, having a protection against that. Amy, you have anything to add there on the viral?
Yeah, my science nerdy brain wants to share that we've seen the deformed wing virus data presented in a few different ways. So we had one scenario where the beginning of the season, both control group and vaccinated group started out with immense amounts of deformed wing virus. And at the end of the season, the vaccinated group had less deformed wing virus. And then we had a scenario on the other side of the country where the beginning of the season, both groups had almost no deformed wing virus. And then throughout the season, our control group went crazy and they have large numbers of deformed wing virus, but our control group or our vaccinated group stayed low. And that deformed wing virus levels stayed very low. So we had a reduction situation and then also a preventative situation, which I just think is very interesting. And I think it just speaks to how their immune systems work and that they're much more generalized. And so they just work in different ways. But that's just my little science piece of that.
So that's what we found with deformed wing. Now that opened up kind of a Pandora's box of what are we doing here and what is being affected. So we have different trials and different studies looking at a broad spectrum of things because we do have other vaccines in the pipeline looking at different pathogens like chalk brood and EFB. So now we're really analyzing what is this doing on its own? Again, triggering the natural response in the queen. And how broad is it? We don't expect it to be extremely broad. We know there's a few things that it doesn't take care of, even like chalk brood in and of itself. Purnell's got some studies going on. And the reality is that we see a drop in things like chalk brood and sac brood, but that's really a correlation because now the hive is healthier. It has less things to deal with, not dealing with the AFB that's in that subclinical level. It's not dealing with the deformed wing virus that's in that subclinical level. And it's just keeping other pathogens out because it's a cleaner, healthier hive. And so we're not going to come on here and claim that we can protect all pathogens from a beehive. That's just silly. So we are looking into what else is it doing.
So, right now it's pretty early and preliminary on the virus stuff. From what I understand, that you guys are doing a lot of testing this coming year, and working with some pretty prominent beekeepers around the country. I won't get into details with that, but that's you guys' information. But I see a lot of comments, and this is one of the problems that I think that we experience, not just in beekeeping, but just in general, is that we really get overly concerned about some things. I see people constantly talking, 20 something years ago was the same thing. Don't get in the way of nature, let Mother Nature do its thing. Well, study Mother Nature. Prior to Varroa, tracheal mites, and all of these problems that mostly plague us now, only about 1 out of 6 colonies survived after swarming into the next season. Mother Nature is extremely brutal. Beekeepers have much higher chances of success typically than wild swarms are going to have. And that's the whole goal. This system, I know some people say, well, humans are the problem. Hey, sometimes we make some mistakes. Thankfully, we're not dumping petroleum products in the Ohio River and they get caught on fire. At least we hope they're still not doing that. So obviously, some things are just outright bad. However, we changed these systems from 100 years ago. 100 years ago would be 1925. When all of us were living mostly day to day, hoping that we could produce enough food to feed our kids, and hopefully they didn't die of some little disease. What would we consider a little disease now, a non-issue now? 2 and 3-year-old children were dying of. People were eating the same food for weeks in a row, malnourished, aging a lot faster due to malnutrition. So our forefathers put in these systems to manage bees on a big level, to create big agriculture so that all of you could be in front of a computer or a $1,200 iPhone right now and watch us instead of having to go to sleep right now so you could prep to plow the fields for as early spring of planting as you could. And hopefully you had a good bit of rain and weather. So nature can be as brutal as it is benevolent. And that is why, as beekeepers and Dalan and companies like them and these Varroa products, we have to be realistic about nature. I'm getting on a tangent. I'll turn it back over to you, I promise. But there are some things out there that, are going to really hurt our bee industry. Tropicalaps is a very scary proposition for Dalen's business, for my business, for your hobby, and our national food supply. I know a lot of people don't like commercial ag. I'm an organic farmer. I got into bees because of health reasons and organics. The realities of it is that we need commercial agriculture until the majority of us decide we're going to start growing our own food. And if you're not willing to work on that, then we need commercial agriculture and commercial beekeeping. So I'm not saying that this is for everybody. If you have 2 hives, maybe not for you, but we have to look into these realms. So that's why I invited Dalan on tonight, because we have to look at all the options. Whenever Tropicalaps gets here, whether that's 2 months or 20 years from now, I want our industry to be prepared. I want the science to be where it needs to be, the tools to be where it needs to be, the information, the average beekeeper's knowledge, they're where they need to be mindset wise, because it's going to be a big adjustment for everybody. And I want this industry to be able to pick itself up and thrive. So, I'm getting off my soapbox. I usually have to get onto it though, because otherwise it's hard to see me. I'm not that tall.
Oh, yeah.
But getting back to this product right here. So you guys have looked into chalk brood, it sounds like, and a few other odds and ends. American foul brood is devastating. In our state, you have to burn everything if you get American foul brood. And though I've never had it, I've read a lot about it, and I've actually taken inspector courses as well to be trained on how to identify and go to someone else's apiary and check for it. And so if I had it, I would want to burn it. It's that bad. If you get American foul brood, I run a few hundred hives. That's the last thing I want, is that running rampant through my apiary. So please continue. Sorry.
No, I mean, the soapbox is valid. The thing in my blood that connects me to agriculture is my grandmother on my mom's side, and she's in the mountains of West Virginia. Excuse me. She, brilliant woman, first to go to college in her family back in 1940 something, which is just remarkable that, because women in college was even a rarity then. Finance degree, had a job, the family went to World War II. She was bound and determined to make sure that she provided for her family. She chose a life of homesteading, basically. What we would call homesteading now. Back then, it was just called living. Right. And she raised an acre. She rotated over 3 acres. She raised an acre of food every year, fed a family of 4, and an abundance of neighbors. Mm-hmm. She bought very few things from the quote unquote grocery store, and so that's where I kind of found my passion finally in midlife, when I broke down and had a crisis of conscience on what was I going to do, because I had a law degree I didn't want to have anything to do with. I had a stint in business management, which was fun and exciting, but not really, I didn't have a passion for what I was doing or the products that we had. Agriculture really struck the bone. And when you go to tomatoes, for instance, and we talk about nature, when I put a tomato in a pot and try to raise it on my patio, it's not nature anymore. That's an artificial soil system. You have to make it artificial soil system because it's in a pot. And so you have to manage it that way. And even in modern day agriculture, when we take a field and we do rows and rows of tomato, those aren't natural, and they have to be managed in a way that's going to yield a crop and produce something for us. And I've been in big ag from the fruit and ag side, and I know all the demons. Some of the demons, not all of them. I know some of the demons in the commercial system, and I'm not a fan of everything there, without a doubt. But the reality is, we have to manage the best we can with what we got. Mm-hmm. And pollinators, as we've seen this past season, man, they're crucial. Mm-hmm. And so why would we think that something that lives to give us 30 or more % of our food isn't worth protecting? And so that's why this company struck my bone. I love feeding people, having a local play there. I think this company really fit the bill, and the team that I work with has the same work ethic and the same values. They're looking to promote bee health, protect the investment of your hive, whether you're a 40,000 hive operator or whether you have 4 hives in your backyard. You spend a lot of money and energy and emotion into these things. These are your babies, so to speak.
Mhm.
Why not give them the protection that they should deserve?
So I agree. Whether you're taking care of your pet dog or cat, whether you're taking care of your bees, you have a responsibility to it. And we've bred things to be quite different. Honeybees always were naturally good at bringing in a lot of honey. That's why we call them honeybees. However, wild bees do one thing quite different than our bees do, is they swarm like crazy. And so if they swarm 5, 6 times in a year, a little bitty clusters left, and only one of them needs to survive to basically do the same thing again the next year. And so as beekeepers, it's not natural necessarily to try to keep them from swarming and raise these huge populations and stuff. We're changing the game. We've bred tomatoes that probably used to be about that big, and now the tomatoes are this big.
Mhm.
And obviously there's going to be some different challenges with that. And so to that point, if you guys got, I kind of hijacked you a little bit earlier. If you got more things you want to run through, but if not, we have some really good questions that relate to your stuff. So just whenever you're ready, guys, we'll get to some of the questions back there. But if you got anything more that you guys would just like to say, I know that you guys have an exciting program. I'm skipping ahead to that too. That you're doing with multiple companies like Hilco and some others. So.
Yeah, we can talk about that when you're ready. Amy, was there anything we missed on the technical side that you want to breeze through?
I don't think so. I think maybe some of that stuff might come up in questions, but no.
Sure. Let's go for the questions, Cayman.
All right. So, well, before we get into the questions, why don't we go ahead and share what you guys are doing, if you don't mind. Or if you want to say that after the questions, I know you guys are working with some of the companies.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, folks like Cayman, here's the thing. So we had this big collapse out west, well, really coast to coast. It was noticed and measured out west when the first pollination event in almonds happened. And as a company, we're just a little startup, right? We're not a big, deep-pocketed company. How can we help? And what we know is really what we're hearing is this is a combination probably, and we won't know until we see some data on it. But this was a combination. This recent collapse was a combination of mite pressure with poor nutrition and an extended honey season that people, they stopped treating their hives with mite treatments to preserve the honey flow that was going a little bit longer. Knocked the mites back, but by that time the damage was already done, and the viruses caught up and got in. And we got some information in the laboratories. We should get some feedback on what the viruses are or were, what the deal is. Was it even viral? But that seems to be the common thread, the common denominator throughout the losses that we've seen. And so for us as a company, it's a matter of how can we get this acceptance rate to start? Because it is for better or worse, we have to call it a vaccine. That's the regulatory world we live in. It's not really what we consider a vaccine in modern times, but it is what it is. And so how do we get past that hurdle in a faster way to get this into a lot of hives to show the protection that we've been seeing and talking about for 3 years? And that's through deals. And so we have the colony loss support or colony loss relief program that came out, and we're working with 4 retailers, with Man Lake, with Dalan, with Hilco, and with Commercial Bee Supply, so that anybody who buys 2 vials or more of the vaccine will receive $250 gift card per vial. $250 per vial value. We're not going to give out 10 cards for 10 vials. It'll be 1 card at $2,500, but it's $250 per vial to the bee supplier of your choice of those 4. And so that's the way that we can give back, because guys are going to have to spend on mite treatments, on pollen subs, on the whole 9 yards. And we understand that. This gives them a little bit more to work with. And so the value of the vaccine they'll see in the protection of their hives, and then the value of the gift cards can come back in different ways.
Sounds awesome. I've got several of my commercial buddies, Bob Benny being one of them, and several others that are testing this out, and obviously optimistic. I'm going to see if I can't do a little bit myself. Chris, thank you for bringing that up. You guys can learn more there, and we have several great questions. We're going to get to those real fast, but I also wanted to show this really quick, because if people are asking me, why am I doing this? Because typically, like, I just told a company today that I didn't want to partner with them because I didn't know their product really well, but it was more of a knick-knack product. This is something that I think this is the kind of science that we need to do to push forward. It's not always the first version too. There's more things that you guys are planning to do in the future, as you've said, and are working on. These are important frontiers that have to be looked into. This is a product right here. It's called Viroxan. It's actually a miticide.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I talked about it in the past. And what's exciting is we are seeing so much more knowledge on oxalic acid, and it's evolved a lot over the last 10 to 15 years, like a ton. And so used to, we were using vaporizers at the wrong temperature, and up to 60 to 70% of the oxalic acid we were putting into the bowl was not making it into the hive. We could see stuff going out, but we actually weren't getting oxalic acid in there, and the temperature was wrong. There's actually some new data that in the last week I've been made aware of. How it's super exciting about, you can go a little too hot, but you can also go a little too cold. And if you keep it too cool and it burns longer, it degrades the acid as well. So there's been some research on the sweet spot. We'll be sharing that in the future, but a combination of these kind of things, it's more exciting to me, because when Varroa came over, what did we lean on? We leaned on fluvalinate. We leaned on Coumaphos or Apistan and Checkmite. And these are extremely toxic in the combs. Once if you have two of them in there, like both different ones, they actually have quite an awful second life and can become even more harsh on your colonies having both of those. And then once those failed, we switched to Amitraz. And so many of us are seeing that now not work as good as it used to, which may be part of what's going on. It's hard to say at this point, but these are very rough chemicals that we do know build residues in the colony. So it excites me to see research going into areas that aren't building up toxic chemicals into our pure beeswax, into our pollen that our bee bread that our bees are going to eat, and into that make it into the honey that my kids are going to eat, and that I'm going to eat. And so, products like, oxalic acid that break down into components that we are exposed to every day, or something like this, which is a bacteria. It's exciting to see things go in that direction, which I would consider much cleaner and healthier for our hives. So I just wanted to say that. And now let's get to some questions. This one is from Zach Heinzelman. Can a vaccinated hive showing reduction of deformed wing virus live with Varroa, or will they still crash? Which I think that's a pretty big ask. But that's where, you guys are the experts. I'll give you the hard question.
Why don't you tell him what we heard in Alberta about the mite pressures and the percentage of risk? Or do you want me to start and then you can?
Yeah. We heard a lot about mites in Alberta.
In Alberta, they had a recently we were up there for their regional workshop day. They take surveys, so this isn't a paper that we can go and link to, because it's for the membership of the Alberta Beekeeping Committee, or whatever it's called. They have commission. Thank you. They have in their surveys, they see that if you have 1% of mites, you're at high risk of loss. If you have 3% or more, it's certain death. There's no margin for error there. I mean that if I was raising a crop, I wouldn't plant it. So that's a tight number.
Mm-hmm.
Will it still crash? If you have high mites, yeah, this is not a mite treatment.
Yeah.
Mites are going to live and chew and breed stuff that the vaccine may not cover. However, perhaps, when mites first came on the scene, we were at 12, 13 mites and you can manage. Now we're at 1 and 3. Well, that's a huge, huge shift. So if we can bump that number up a bit, we'll see. We don't know yet, but that's our working theory.
Yeah.
And Amy, correct me if I've said anything out of place.
No, it might come with more pressures than just the viruses they transmit. And so, there's still a risk of them stressing your hive, whether the viruses are affecting the bees or not. So I think it's important that if you do start using the vaccine, that it's part of a larger management program, and we're not just relying on one thing. I don't think Dalan's ever tried to be that silver bullet. That's not our goal at all. But if we can help them be healthier and reduce that stress in some ways so that they're better equipped to deal with other stresses, we're happy to provide something that can do that.
And here's a question from Lisa. Aren't vaccines for a virus? How does this vaccine create immunity against bacteria?
You want me to go?
Oh, yeah. I want
Yeah, well, so there are some vaccines for viruses. We've made those for ourselves. The honeybee immune system is more innate than ours. So we don't the bees don't make antibodies. They're not making specific things. So their bodies can just recognize a certain size particle or a type of particle, like a bacteria or a virus or a different kind of bacteria or a fungus, and then their immune systems recognize it as a bad guy, and they're going to attack that when they see it. And so this is just kind of how I explained earlier, where that's information being transferred from one generation to another. And so it's not really immunity against the bacteria, but it's their immune systems being primed to fight it when they see it. It's not really an antibody that's killing things, and it's just telling their bodies to attack this. So
you're basically just helping them do what some of the bees would already do anyways. You're just trying to get it uniformly throughout the entire colony, or trying to get them to express that a gene that's already within them.
Yeah, well, it's essentially. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I'm somewhat following this. Do I get like an A+ for that answer?
Yeah.
Perfect. Gold star. So I was homeschooled. I never got a gold star. So this is like my first gold star. So perfect.
We'll mail you some.
What was that laugh, Everett? What was that? You didn't get a gold star either, even though
No,
you were homeschooled.
so my kids, we were together today for our worship and all that with our congregation, and the kids there have now this thing that you said to me that when you said that just triggered. Homeschool kids, that exists in all communities now. Mm-hmm. My kids aren't there yet, but they have this thing where they're doing now the fist bump, but they do this. Give me a fist bump.
Like, oh my goodness.
I got a snail. Now maybe that's new for me, but being a 10 and 7-year-old, a dad of a 10 and 7-year-old, I was just like, hey, I got a new dad joke to share with Kayla.
Well, I've got a 9 and 13-year-old, and so Kathleen's at that age where that's really going to make her go, really, Dad? So of course I'm going to do it.
Absolutely.
It's I've worked hard to become a dad, and I just helped with septic stuff today, so part of my reward is being able to get that eye roll. So back to questions. Let's see here. We have several good ones. That one's more about pollen. So Sam, I see your question about jasmine pollen. I actually don't have that here in Tennessee that I'm aware of. That pollen that damages bees. That's Bob Benny really is the expert on that, and I don't know how to deal with toxic pollens. Thankfully, I've never had to figure that one out. So let's see. All right. William Ravenshire. Question for the Dalan team. Will you be doing something similar for a smaller scale bee operations less than 100 hives?
So for less than 100, your best option, if you're not making your own queens, which most guys under 100 are not, is to find, we have several Dalan approved vaccinators that sell queens all over the country. Yes, high concentration are out in California, but we have them in Pennsylvania and Florida and Georgia and Indiana or Ohio. So there are other options for you to try this out in your operation. Special deals, because that is their business, not ours. We can't really do much on that end. But they may run promotions, they may run specials. What I would encourage people to do at that scale is to, take a handful, get a dozen, put them into your hives, see how they perform against, your other hives. And apples for apples, make sure you got the same breeds and from the same producer and that type of thing to make it at least fair, and monitor it for yourself, because what we see in the field, the benefits from this disease production ends up in our honey production, ends up in things like brood production on the front end, especially coming out of almonds, going into almonds, faster buildup, less disease in general, like we talked about with shock brood and sac brood, brood production, honey production. What am I missing, Amy? There's some other things in there. I'm missing it, but
I think that's most of them.
more balance. That's
yeah.
brood patterns, better brood nest size. We hear this all the time, and I don't know how to quantify this, Cayman, but maybe you can help define it for me. My hives are better balanced. I'm like, okay, what's balance? Because that seems pretty arbitrary from one beekeeper to the next, but that's a term that keeps coming up across the board. So,
well, that's been my experience with them. Is as someone who's kept a lot of hives, have had my heads in hundreds of hives. You open a hive, if it's functioning properly or not. By the sound of it, by the look of what they're doing, if something's off or not when you pop the lid, if you're an experienced beekeeper.
By how hard the lid is to pop off sometimes.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
This one's a good colony. This lid's, they've propolised it down good.
Yeah. So it's just that for me as a beekeeper, when someone says my hive is more balanced, I know exactly what they mean. That they're functioning how you expect them to function.
Oh, healthy balanced hives is great. The hives do thrive on balance. Things get difficult when things are out of balance. If you have bees that are too old, you can have a wonderful queen and they won't accept her even though she's great, just because they're out of balance and they blame that on the queen. So being a beekeeper is trying to keep that healthy balance of bees in there as much as possible and the different stages. When I found out about the deformed wing virus possibility, that one's huge to me. I'm anxious to see where that goes, because we know for a fact that the viruses are ultimately what are taking the bees out. The mites definitely are the dirty syringe that are injecting into our bees and also into the next generation. And so they're weakening them there, but they're also injecting up, I've heard as high as 800 times higher levels of deformed wing virus. The viruses are already in the bees, and many of the viruses were already here before Varroa, and so we didn't really know much about them because we didn't need to know anything about them. But as the viruses have either mutated or whatever the proper term is, we've seen where the bees are not able to withstand as high of mite loads because the viruses have become more aggressive, and the best way for viruses to transfer across the entire colony, which is just injecting all the stages. And I want people to think about this. I use this term a lot because it's really easy to kind of picture the quantities here. If you have a colony that's double deeps and it's just full of bees from top to bottom, that's about 40,000 bees. And so a 1% mite infestation is 400 mites. You're not going to see hardly any mites unless you just happen to stumble upon one where you're really looking hard for them. We did a test with 52 packages a few years ago. We broke them into 4 groups, and one of the 13 did not receive any treatment. And we did multiple washes. We did one in early June. We did one 2 months later in early August. Then we did one at the very end of September. And I'd already observed for years that colonies that didn't get treated properly crash here in October, typically, maybe late September if it's really bad. And the colonies on average had a little over 1.5% mite loads in early August when we did the washes, but all of them looked wonderful. And to look at those bees, you're like, wow, they have food, beautiful brood patterns. The bees look great, but they had 1.5% mite infestations. The mites double every 21 days if they're unhindered. There's a lot of things that could hinder them. It could be maybe the bees are a little bit more hygienic. Maybe they swarm. Maybe you make a split. Maybe you go queenless for a little bit. But if they're not hindered and you don't have any resistance, they double every 21 days. So now 1.5%, 3%, okay, 6%, 12%. And so these packages started very low. When we washed all the colonies the first week of June, 2 months after installation, we hardly saw a mite in any of the washes. We did see an occasional one, but over 2/3, we didn't even detect any mites within the washes. So they grow rapidly, and it really compounds throughout the year. So to me, we're getting hit as beekeepers on multiple fronts. Sometimes nature doesn't give us as good of nutrition. That stresses our bees out. Our bees don't live as long when they don't have as good nutrition. Their immune system's not near as good. So if you take a combination of maybe a lack of nutrition, I got a little late on treating the mites than I probably should have. Viruses are going to thrive better in a poor nourishment environment in higher stress years. So as beekeepers, we're getting hit on multiple fronts. That is where I feel like, as someone who's a beekeeper, obviously, and also I communicate with a lot of beekeepers, I want to be able to attack all these problems on multiple fronts. So you guys are offering a different option to what we typically do, which is when in doubt, nuke them out. And we're starting to see a lot more technology and information. So I got off on a little bit of a tangent. Let's get back to a couple questions real quick. Let's see what. So do you have like a percentage of the vaccinated queen's progeny that are actually protected from AFB? Or is it, just enough to suppress it?
We don't have exact, not exactly in those terms. Our efficacy data from those original studies for getting our conditional license, we had 30 to 50% efficacy at an extreme dosage. So it takes 10 to 100 spores to infect a larva. These larvae in this study were bombarded with 2,000 to 5,000 spores. So they were overly overwhelmed with spores, and we still had 30 to 50% efficacy. And that measurement is how many of those individual larvae survived to day 7, 8. So it's sort of a correlation with like a number of larvae of eggs that queen would lay. But we didn't quite measure it that way.
So here's a question from Michael Joe. So what's the shelf life on the vial of a vaccine? I have less than 50 hives, but would like to get this in the hives I do have. I produce my own queens.
So the shelf life is 18 months from the date of manufacture. And so say the batch I think that is in stock right now expires in September. There'll be another batch that comes out that will be 18 months away. Mm-hmm. However, once you pop the top on the vial, it needs to be used. You can mix it and pre-make your candy, and if you use that candy within a month's time, then you're pretty safe. But if we don't know what dehydration does to it because it is in that aqueous solution. So if it dehydrates, we can't really speak to what the efficacy is. Amy, am I misstating that?
No. we've had people do that. They want to do kind of 25 at a time or something. So they'll mix a whole batch and use half of the candy to vaccinate 25 and then do the next half within a month. If you do that, keep it in the fridge in as airtight of a container as possible. The big concern of using it later on is contamination of that candy. That candy can get moldy. It can, if you mix it in a dirty environment, you can pick up other things that might grow in that. And then we don't know what the impact of feeding those things to queens are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more about limiting that contamination time. So if you're going to only use part of it, you keep it in the fridge, whatever you don't use, and use it within a month.
And I'll say too, there's been some bee clubs that purchase this as a group, and then they divvy up. They'll pre-mix the candy and then divvy it up against 5 or 10 members, whatever the case is. There's a group I'm thinking of in particular in the Ohio Valley. They're very active at the Bee Expo, so that's an option too, depending on how good your relationship is with your bee clubs.
Yeah, and community is really important. The bees thrive on that. Beekeepers that I know that do the best typically have their good network around them. It's hard to do everything by yourself. And on that point, Central Kentucky Bees, says I run 53 hives. I requeen every 2 years unless they mess up and they do it themselves. I don't feel like the cost of vaccination probably for someone like me is for something I've never seen. And that's the beauty of not everybody will try it out at first, but we need enough people to figure out what's going on. And there are a lot of people that are trying it, especially on the commercial side, seeing them test it. Their bees are run so much more intensively than the smaller beekeepers who don't move their bees. They're going through a lot more stressors. They do have to deal with things in ag that aren't as ideal for bees. And so what would be great, and I think what we're going to see is people test it over the next little while, and from different walks of life, because there are smaller beekeepers that are doing this. And so we're going to be able to see how this plays out. And we want this information share to be good because, Dalan, if there's some good things, Dalan's going to be able to take that and maybe turn that into great things. That's what we've seen with the instant vaporizer is a great example that I like to talk about, because when Janos reached out to Rob and myself, he was making a really great vaporizer, but it was the best thing at the time. It's a fraction of what the new one is, and he's working on an even better model now. And so there are companies out there who, given the chance, will continue to adapt and evolve as they learn more. Rarely are these things really quick. I mean, my Bee Expo is another fine example. Anyone who's kind of observed over the last 5 years, we've had moments of hiccups as well. I think it's been worth it. There's been some days I've questioned that or not, but ultimately it takes time and patience to get to the outcomes that we want. And I think it's kind of counterproductive. I'm not saying Central Kentucky Bees is doing this at all. I think it was a good question. But those I see, they're always just shooting everything down instantly. Well, you're creating, if everybody does that, you're going to create an environment where nothing happens, and it's a stagnant beekeeping environment. And then we're going to be rocking it like it's 1980, but the pathogens and viruses and problems are 2025 tough.
Yeah.
And so we have to keep up with all these things. And that's why I bring guys like Corey Stevens on here, and Randy Oliver and Dr. Frank Rinkovic, because genetics has always been part of the solution as well. So this is, again, we need a multi-pronged attack, and you guys, I think, are definitely part of the solution. So Mark Allen makes a comment. You talked about the transfer, Amy, earlier. He's like milk from mother to her young. Is it like an immune information transfer? Is that kind of right?
Yeah, so that's the analogy I use when it's hard to explain a vaccine to people. And that transgenerational immune priming concept can seem foreign, but it's actually happens in a lot of species of animals. Most familiar to us is a breastfeeding mother. Her milk contains that kind of information, and she's passing it on to her infant. in order for that baby to be protected until its immune system is ready to be exposed to those things without dying from being exposed to those things. So it's that same concept, basically, is that transgenerational immune priming.
To me, it's exciting after 23 years, and most of my buddies like Bob and Chris Werner and several others who have been beekeeping longer than I've been alive, some of those guys, they want to see, guys like Bob, he wants to see this industry of his do well and thrive. And that's why he creates the great videos that he does. That's why he gives back so much. And I think there's a lot of guys that are starting to see that, hey, the average, commercial beekeeper is quite old. And we need to try to get things as good as possible so that one day there's other commercial beekeepers that are able to pollinate watermelons and make sure that the meadow foam gets pollinated, and also just that honey and beeswax and real health foods like that are available. Every beekeeper that I've ever talked to wants things to be as natural as possible, and like I said before, having options that don't involve these heavy chemicals that are going to build up into our combs is exciting. I'm excited to see as you guys explore this. And like I've said before, I'm going to be sharing anything that you think of merit to share. You send it my way. We also have the videos or the video of the presentation you guys gave at the Bee Expo. We don't typically do this. Like, we've never done this. But we are going to be sharing that video with the general public. We've, of course, Dalan has graciously agreed to let us do that. Of course, the rest of the videos, anyone who came has already got them anyhow. But for those who weren't able to come to the conference, I'm going to release that onto my YouTube channel to where you can see the full presentation that Amy and Everett give at the Bee Expo. So you can get more of your questions answered than just what we were able to do tonight. Central Kentucky Bees, who asked that question. And I'm like a 10-year-old. I have a lot of questions. Good chat, guys. Thanks for the preview, Dalan. See everyone in tomorrow's chat, hopefully. And that's right. Tomorrow night, I'm going to have a general sessions Q&A. And so we can talk about this a little more. I'll try not to flub. Oh, Chris Chadwick, thank you so much. Looking forward to getting those nukes to you. They're going to be awesome because that's what you deserve and what you're paying for. So that's what you're going to get. And this year we're doing some of our nukes with Corey Stevens Queens, and that's something that we've never tried before. And so I'm excited to see where that goes. What I would love to see is a combination. Maybe one of these days I'll have time to have some mite resistant bees with vaccinated queens and just see if all of a sudden my bees produce honeys with sparkles in it or something like that. Something just outlandish.
Yeah. The fairy dust emanates from the honey pool.
Well, our bees in Tennessee already produce the best honey in the world. So I don't know if we really need to ask for anything more than that. It's not like that canola honey Ian produces. I hope that he hears this. But I know Ian Stepler, of course, is also interested in this as well. And so that's as YouTubers that have a following. I know that Ian, myself, and Bob and some others take this very seriously. I can't speak for all those other guys. I have almost every day somebody asking me to promote their stuff. Every day, and we say no to most of it. We're not into pushing gimmicks and stuff, but this is research into honeybees. There's so much that can be gained from searching into these avenues. You never know. Sometimes you're trying to find one thing and you discover something else along the way, and that's the value of science. So Amy and Everett, can you give us a real quick recap for everybody on what you guys are doing with this program one more time so people can hear that?
Okay, so order 2 vials or more, and you'll get a minimum $500 gift card, value of $250 per vial, back to a bee supplier of your choice, be that Hilco, Man Lake, Dayton, or Commercial Bee Supply.
It keeps it simple. That's the way I prefer it. And, so anyone that has already been thinking about doing this, maybe find some bee buddies. That's what the Bee Expo is all about. So shameless plug there. The Bee Expo, we got Chris on board full time now. We're working with more and more companies to get the best education out and the best products out. And we want you there so that you can contribute. And the people really contribute so much to the Bee Expo. They'll go up to the companies and like, we really prefer if you would do the extractor like this. Why can't you do that? And we didn't have that really before on this level, because we have 3,000 people giving instant feedback to the company, looking the company in the eye. It really matters. And these companies talk to me about it afterwards. And of course, some of them just don't care. It's pretty easy to know who those guys are. But there's some of them that are like, wow, we got some really cool feedback. And this new edition of things we're producing, we're going to tweak this. And so the Bee Expo is really all about the whole industry coming together and being able to move forward and make meaningful change. Whether it's, hey, how do we educate a new beekeeper and keep them into our industry, and so that they're not discouraged from some losses, or how is it we can get these sideliners to actually make their sideline profitable, or maybe even graduate into professional commercial beekeepers. So anyways, Amy, you got Everett, you got anything to say before we say adios and get some sleep?
Well, I think just if there's more questions, feel free to email them to either of us. I know there's some questions we didn't get to, so if there's any dire need for answers, feel free to reach out to us.
Well, thank you for offering that, and thanks for being transparent, and thanks for dealing with all the flack that we get on social media. And I promise you, it's not over. But all jokes aside, look forward to hearing more from you guys in the future, and you all have a great weekend, and we'll see you in the next video.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.